Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a very special publication. Black Ocean, we've been publishing for 18 years now. We're based here in Boston and in Chicago, and probably done somewhere close to 120 books or something like that. But this book is very important to me for a few reasons. If you'll allow me to digress a little while we wait for two of our readers to arrive. Um, uh, I became an undergrad at Emerson College, thinking that I wanted to write the next great American novel, and I was focused in fiction. And about halfway through my 4 years at Emerson, I took a writing class with Bill Knott. And he was such an interesting, eccentric, somewhat curmudgeonly teacher that my friend, like you're, whatever, I was like 19 years old at that time, and you're just like, who are these idiots teaching me, that I'm paying to teach me? Um, and, uh, and, but he was such an interesting person in the classroom that we were like, oh yeah, let's see what his poems are like. Let's look him up. And I at that time, the Naomi poems had already been out of print for 30 years or something like that. And so, it was like selling for $100 on eBay or something, and I was a broke undergrad. I couldn't buy it. But we found a copy in, I think it was the Emerson Library, and photocopied it. And that was the one privilege we had, for our $40,000 tuition, as we got free photocopies. So we photocopied the book. And when I read the poems in this book, I think we sort of casually say like something blew our minds, but it like really did. I was like, wow, you can write poems like this? Like you're allowed to do this in poems? Up until that point, I loved poetry, but most of the poetry I had read was either like German romantics or some, I wouldn't say contemporary American poetry, but modern American poetry, like E. Cummings, T.S. Eliot, that type of stuff, which was interesting to me, but it didn't like ignite me. And when I read Bill's poems, I felt like I was on fire. And so and then in the course of taking his class, he turned me on to other really interesting poets and French surrealists and some South American writers, who he had been turned on to by Bly, and we can sort of talk about that in the biographical portion of this evening. But I switched my focus from fiction to poetry, and I continued to study with Bill for my last 2 years as an undergrad. And then he encouraged me to go to grad school. Um, and it was in grad school that I got even more serious about poetry, that I met a couple of friends who, after grad school, I decided to start Black Ocean with. And one of the reasons I started Black Ocean, I had always, I came from the sort of punk rock DIY zine culture, and I had always fantasized about having my own press since I was like 16, 15 years old. But when I was, whatever, 25 or however old I was when I finished grad school, and I was trying to decide what to do next with life, one of the reasons I wanted to start Black Ocean, not just to make beautiful books in a way that I wasn't really being done in the early aughts with poetry, but it was also to reprint Bill Knott's early out of print poems. So truly, almost half my life later, because I started Black Ocean when I was 26 and I'm 46 now, this is a dream come true for me. And on top of that, I was living with 8 people in a 4-bedroom apartment in JP when I started Black Ocean. And you need money to start a press. I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but uh, so I started going around to banks asking if they would loan me $10,000. I was 26 years old, and I remember one bank was like, yeah, we'll lend you 10% of your annual income. So if I was making $100,000, I wouldn't need to borrow $10,000 from you. But I did find a bank who said that they would loan me the money if I gave them a business proposal. I had 2 degrees in poetry and I was 26 years old. And I was like, oh, okay, I can figure that out. So I looked up on the nascent early aughts internet how to write a business proposal. And I put together a business proposal. I knew that at that time, I knew Bill was really admired by a lot of culturally influential and important people. I knew Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth loved his work. I knew, like Richard Hell and all these really interesting and also all these really great American poets loved Bill's work. And so my business proposal was that I would, in the first 5 years of Black Ocean, I would reissue Bill's early books, and they would sell so well that within 5 years, I would make $1 million. And the bank was like, this sounds reasonable. Here's $10,000. So I got my $10,000 loan based on the assertion that by publishing this book, I would make $1 million. I did pay off the loan. And I did start talking with Bill about publishing his books. And midway through that ongoing exchange with Bill about reissuing his early books, The Unsubscriber came out with FSG. And 2 things happened after the release of that book. One is that a pretty unfavorable review of the book came out. And which you'll probably hear plenty of stories of throughout the evening. He was not someone who tended to usually care about what people said about his work. In fact, if people said really good things about his work, he was like violently dismissive of that. But for whatever reason, he found this review demoralizing. And then FSG remaindered the hardcover. And as we'll also get into later this evening, after he swore off traditional publishing with this experience with The Unsubscriber, he really went full tilt into self-publishing and distributing his work in like the most incredibly prolific, aggressive ways possible. And what became clear in the years that followed was how not just like, any poet would find sort of like insulting, like, oh, like my book didn't sell well enough and now you're going to destroy it unless I buy copies. But it was that he just believed that if the books are made, they should be read and they should be given away, right? They shouldn't be just pulped or whatever. And so when he had that experience, he swore off traditional publishing entirely. He said he no longer wanted to publish these books with Black Ocean. He was only going to post them for free online and make them himself. And that's what he did for the rest of his life. So much to the ghost of Bill Knott's chagrin, we are now publishing his work. But it's been really, so far, it's been really fantastic experience to be doing this. To be connecting with people all over the country, all over the world, who are lovers of his work, who are passionate supporters of his work, who are so excited to see this book come out. And I think with that, I'd love to welcome up our first reader of this evening. We have a few readers tonight who have different relationships with Bill, and for each of the readers, when you come up, we're going to do it in alphabetical order, and I invite you to share a little bit about your relationship either to Bill personally or to Bill's work or whatever you want to do. I know some of us have some stories to tell. So let's welcome up our first reader of this evening, Sean Cole.
Mozart. Mozart, when you were kissing a woman's cunt, were you never afraid of kissing your own slimy, shrunken pate emerging from within? Footnote to Mozart. Why Mozart? The prodigy. He begins his art at a very early age, thus comes close to kissing his birth. I love those poems a lot. There's one in which he sticks his head into the womb to make faces of the unborn. There's sort of a theme there with Mozart kissing his own pate. I didn't know Bill, like some of the other folks reading did. I loved his work so much and went to see him read at Wordsworth, I think, when Jim Burley was curating readings there. And I was like, talk about like, you know, like Bill Knott kryptonite. I was sitting in the front row, just like rapt. And also I have a propensity to laugh really loudly in general, and especially at poems that I think are funny. And a lot of his poems are really funny. And at one point during the reading, he paused and he's like, "What's with this guy? He's on drugs. Is he laughing so much?" And then like, you know, a terrible fanboy, I went up to him afterwards, and I didn't have it with me at the time, but I have it with me now. I said, you know, Bill, I love your work so much, and I just got one of your books. At a used bookstore. I can't remember which one it is now. And it's so funny. You signed it to Helen Vendler, and he's like, "She sold it. What? Oh my God!" You know, he was just really offended. And you know, there's a gentility in some of these poems that like I didn't experience in the brief moments of interacting with him, such as this one. Poem. My sperm is liar in your, excuse me. My sperm is liar in your blood. Your smell wanders over me like a mouth. You die a moment in my eyes, then pass through into my heart. Where you live as a drunk, where you live as that body burnt, naked by the throes of your whitest name. River carving a death mask for those words. I paint the features of a face on the head of my cock, but I don't call it Orpheus. Bridge between love and paper, between dream and quicksand, you salt-tongued to idea abysses gaze. Our sunglasses broken like chow. All of time battles your instant. You lie under cool, enormous leaves, once the sun's eyelids. Your instant, into which dies mine, and eternities, and ours, sweat bead upon your belly. Poem for Irene Keller, who asked for one. If all your bones were candles, your face would still be a dark answer. If your smells were wind chimes, breezes would leave too late to reach their destination, would arrive at their predestination. And if your skin were sheets of paper, my ashes blown over them would make the lines I meant to not write. Chimera dressed in chimeras. If you were this poem, I would not be its writer. There's a poem that is not in this book that I was telling Janaka when he did the events in New York that I love so much. And it's funny, I went looking, it's so short. I went looking for it online and could not find a printed version of it. But if this works, sorry. I found, I don't know if this will work, but I found a recording of Bill reading it. see if I fast forwarded to where it starts.
At the crossroads, the wind blows a piece of paper to my feet. I pick it up. It is not a petition for my death.
It's the entire poem. The entire poem. It's not a petition for my death. And I was going to read two more, but Chris, you said you're Chris, right? Sorry, you're Chris. Sorry. We both were wanting to read.
Oh yeah, no,
The
you
Wasp.
take it.
Is that okay? Okay, great.
Yeah, you called it first.
All right. Thank you very
I
much.
didn't read the email.
That's okay. So two more of these. Last poem. It's harder and harder to whistle you up from my pack of dead. You lag back, loping in another love. Fate is lucky not to have known you as I have known you. One drawn the menstrual face of time found, frozen upon stones. Poor song of the poet. Rigor mortis walked the streets, its coat tattered, face pensive. A howl was heard, calming chimeras. My hair strikes me a great blow. Wine lifts its deep sky over us. And Naomi was sown. She crossed the boundaries of wounds to kneel in the snowfall at the center. Her palms upon my forehead became my fever's petals. Her face, arced a triumph of sadness, altar where my heart is solved, created for me its absence in the arc of its cheekbones. Girls tie their hair together and run as one woman through my voice land. Ground glass sings my statues. Those who can only kiss wound to wound are born. Your face alone has no echo in the void. Your face, more marvelous each time it flows up your warm arms to break upon your smile. Your kiss is still rustling in my voice. You don't exist. I will fill you with sweet suicide. Naomi, love other men. Don't let this be their last poem, only mine. This is the last one I'll read. This is called The Wasp Poets of America. And it's for Richard Deutsch. The poets cry, retirement, to be a good gray. The shriek-plumaged muse of America slices down and garlands those who resemble vaults. Pound is retired, bending over his cane as over a bomb site. Oh, Spain, Ethiopia, Vietnam, your good gray ash poets. Me and James Dickey are battling it out for the title of the good gray flannel poet. Let's suck up to those we would replace. The fathers who sold us as a whore, our mother. Retirement. Is this the best of all possible words? Who is not a square once in a coffin, which is to say an America? Good blonde poets, you senile in the womb, the world is growing young against us. And we don't even have a pension plan written, not to mention poems.
Yeah, that's. I forgot to mention our first reader is on drugs. Sean, I'm so glad that you found and played that recording of Phil reading. That was, I mean, I haven't heard him read poems since he died. Since before he died, like probably it's been 20 years since I have heard him read. And one of the things that's been great about doing these events is hearing Bill's poems in other people's voices and how other people read his work. But what you don't usually get to hear is how much of an orator he was when he read his work. And it was often sort of, I mean, you only caught a glimpse because that poem was so short, but he would often read in this very sort of like enunciatory, forceful fashion. And he was known for doing things in his readings like, I went to one reading he did where he had loose leaf pages and he read the poem, and then when he was done with the poem, he crumpled it up and he just threw it into the audience. And then he would read the next one and crumple it up and throw it into the audience, and the next one and crumple it up and throw it into the audience. Okay, anyway, I'd now like to welcome up our second reader, who may or may not be on drugs. I don't know. All bets are off now at this point, but please welcome up Eric Paul.
I am not on drugs, but if you have them, I'll take them. Oh, all right. So I'm going to say two things about Bill Knott. I never had a personal relationship with him. However, I went to this event in Providence, where I'm from, and Alyssa Gabbard was speaking affectionately and about Bill Knott and sharing her experiences. And one of the things that she said about Bill Knott was that he was punk rock. And it was really interesting because I was introduced to Bill Knott after years of being in touring punk bands and trying to figure out what the fuck to do with the rest of my life. And I went to school and I had a professor named David Daniels who just canceled on me 5 minutes ago, who was supposed to be here. I'm just still processing. But when I went in with my fucking weird poems, he was like, you should read these three writers. And one of them was Bill Knott. And it was really exciting because I've never quite understood what I like about the art or music or writing that I've liked, but I've been thinking about it since Alyssa was talking about the work of Bill Knott, and I realized that I think what I sort of migrate towards is any work that kind of has this fuck you-ness, and I just can't articulate it any other way. I've always known what I've liked, but I've never known how to articulate it. But Alyssa did such an amazing job at articulating what that was about Bill. And also, my assessment over the last couple of weeks has been that there's a bravery to his work. There's a courage to it. And coming from being in this touring band for 20 years, wanting to do something different with my life, there was always this sort of imposter syndrome, sort of lingering around my brain, my insecurities. But there was something about Bill Knott's work that made just taking a stab at it okay. And it has nothing to do with undermining the value or quality of his work. It was just some soul to it that inspired that bravery in me. And I feel like I've seen it in other poets. And I just wanted to share that. I'll read a couple poems and then I will say my last thing last. Nuremberg, USA. In this time and place where bread and circuses has become bread and atrocities, to say I love you is like saying the latest propaganda phrase, defoliation, low yield blast. If bombing children is preserving peace, then me fucking you is a war crime. So appropriate for what we're experiencing now on many levels. Summer, an afternoon walk, you're here, the color of barn light. There's the field, this is the river. Our first loving has reached the sea by now, where it will meet and embrace our childhood. We bathe in the flow of a mute woman's happiness, sitting on the bank, dangling and drifting on the water. Come back. The flowers nuzzle our joined hands. Another poem called Death. Death. Perfume opens its eyes of you. I shall be the shepherd of your hair, a dawn made of all the air I've ever breathed. Now I have two more poems to read for you, but I also wanted to share the second sort of antidote about Bill. Beyond giving me or being one of the writers that sort of encouraged me viscerally or through the ether to actually take a stab at writing poems. I also would throughout my life go through these really intense death phases. And I would read Tibetan Book of the Dead. I was like, maybe I really do like Jesus. Like I would really go through a lot of this sort of pontification about how the fuck am I going to deal with this, right? And then I read one particular death poem by Bill Knott, and it really probably brought me the most comfort facing my own mortality than anything I've ever experienced. And I actually fucking tattooed it on my arm up here. I didn't realize till after that that's my wife and child's name under it, which does spark some discussion at points in our home. It was really just an accident, but anyway, it really I felt like if Bill Knott can do it, I can fucking do it. So you know, I'm ready. Bring on the drugs, bring on the death. Let's go. Two more poems. I love you. Yeah, two more poems, and then I'll conclude. Let me look at my note. All right, poem to women, page 36. And I fell through all your absent arms with the star I had never flung desperately back to weld apart my heart. And lastly, I have Widow's Winter on page 40. I mean, look how organized I am. I have paper clips. Certainly someone that does drugs would never have paper clips. Widow's Winter. Outside, the snow is falling into its past. I do want this night to end. In the fireplace, a section of ash caves in. The fall day you were buried, birds went over south, thick enough to carry someone. They took my gapes of breath, their fuel. We are together in some birds who fail. I didn't even want to look at your grave. Its heroic little mound, like the peck of dirt we hope to eat in our life. Thank you. Very flattered to be here. I look forward to hearing the other readings.
Yeah, each time's like the first time. Thank you, Eric, for sharing those poems and those experiences. When I did these events, the first events for the book, a number of weeks ago in New York, I did them with Richard Hell, who wrote the new foreword to the edition. And for those of you, some of you may not be familiar with who Richard Hell is. He is often referred to as the godfather of punk. Richard Hell and the Voidoids, among other musical influences, but sort of early proto-punk, not really proto-punk, but punk, CBGB's New York era, alongside the Ramones, and known to influence the Sex Pistols. And that's what brings me to this next anecdote. Is around campus, Bill was always really disheveled. And he would have like a pocket protector, like a real actual plastic pocket protector that was overflowing with like highlighters and red pens and blue pens and pencils and markers and all that stuff. And he was often wearing like a really just sort of threadbare moth-eaten sweater. And around that time, I was reading a couple of sort of cultural histories of punk rock. And I remember reading a passage that talked about like Malcolm McLaren, who was sort of the business manager behind the Sex Pistols, seeing Richard Hell perform at CBGB's, and at that time Richard Hell was wearing a sweater that was like held together with a safety pin. And then Malcolm McLaren went back to London and was like, yeah, that's the style. That's what we're going to kind of like build into this image of the Sex Pistols. And around, I don't know when it was, like, it was after I graduated, but still early aughts, I discovered that Richard Hell was a fan of Bill's. And so I started formulating this sort of like cultural conspiracy theory, like that Charlie from Always Sunny meme of like, well, Richard Hell was a fan of Bill, and Bill wears sweaters that are all torn. And so actually Bill Knott is the godfather of punk rock. Which in conversations with Richard since then, he has said that is not how that came about. But in an actually much more meaningful and interesting way, when we were talking in New York, and he shared it at our event at Poets House, that when Richard dropped out of high school and moved to New York to become a poet, that's why Richard moved to New York. And he and Tom Verlaine picked up this book in a bookstore when it came out in 1968 and fell in love with it. And they used to do like exquisite corpses with each other, riffing on lines, and were just really heavily influenced by Bill's work. And as we were talking, and as sort of like the conversation was unfolding, it was almost like these light bulbs were going off, and he shared how much of Bill's poems actually influenced him as a lyricist. And the ways that you'll see in a number of these poems, let's see if I can find one. Yeah, so he'll have poems that have like a word in parentheses and then another word in parentheses. And if you look at that first Blank Generation album by Richard Hell and the Voidoids, he does that in the titles of some of the songs in his album. And it was like, he was like realizing it almost for the first time. He's like, yeah, I mean, I just was totally ripping off Bill in like that first Blank Generation album. So in a much more meaningful, artistic way than just a torn sweater, Bill Knott is the godfather of punk rock. So yeah, very influential. I'd like to now welcome up our next reader. Our next two readers, we have a special cabal relationship where when Bill had retired from Emerson and he was preparing to move back to Michigan, Chris, Chad, and myself packed up Bill in his apartment into a moving truck. And then Chris drove him to Michigan. I don't know how much of that you're going to share tonight, but these next two readers had that experience with me, and they were also both students of Bill. So please welcome up Chad Reynolds.
Thanks, Janaka. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I think I was at that Wordsmith or Wordsworth reading. Was it with Franz Wright?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I saw him read with Franz Wright, and that was a weird love-hate relationship
Yeah.
they had.
that would have been weird.
Yeah, oh, it was really, I mean, there was a lot of like passive aggressive stuff, but wow, I mean, this is pretty exciting to be up here talking about Bill Knott. He was, pretty important to me, I'd say. I don't want to oversell it. Don't want to undersell it. It was in his was the first class I took at Emerson College when I was a graduate student there. The very first class I went to, 8:30 on Monday. My first day of class there was with Bill Knott. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, unlike this guy who knew all about Bill Knott, and that's what attracted him to Emerson. I just had sort of heard about him after I got in, but didn't really understand until that first class, which was with Elisa Gabbard. She and I were in the first class together that same year, and I think we both definitely cried, along with other people. I remember I brought a poem into. I was really into Frank Stanford, and I brought a poem in that was kind of like a Frank Stanford poem. It was like a story about my upbringing in Oklahoma. You know, he's from Arkansas, I'm from Oklahoma. I felt a kinship to him, and it was a little prosaic. And he said, this isn't a poem," and that was devastating. But it was also good because then, like 2 poems later, he was like, "This is a poem," and that poem ended up being published in a magazine that's fairly well known called Puerto del Sol. And that was my first published poem. And that was pretty cool. I wrote it in Bill Knott's class. And he was the kind of teacher that would be like, "That's not a poem." But if it was a good poem, he'd say, "That's a poem, and I'll pay you $5 for that poem." I swear to God, he would offer people money for the poems that they brought into class if he liked them, because he thought they were good. And I've thought about this a lot over the years, because I feel like I became a poet in Bill Knott's class and maybe ceased to be a poet in Bill Knott's class somehow, because he was very kind, he was very tender, and he was very brusque, and he helped you get over your imposter syndrome. But he suffered the most from imposter syndrome. It's clear. And I think he inculcated in me imposter syndrome as well. I mean, it was hard to live up to a guy like Bill, who wore everything on his tattered sleeves, tattered, mustard stained sleeves. Just I saw John Scoyles. Yeah. John Scoyles and I, he was my thesis advisor with Bill Knott, and I was waiting in Bill Knott or John Scoyles' office to defend my thesis, and Bill Knott was 15 minutes late, and he showed up with a Subway sandwich that had a lot of mustard on it, and he proceeded to unwrap it. My silly manuscript is here on his lap. He's sitting down in Scoyles' office, and he's taking a bite of this sandwich, and mustard is just spilling, just gushing out, and one bounced on his sweater and then like sort of careened off and landed on my manuscript. And then what he said about it was amazing. It was this disgusting, sloppy mustard, like glorious assessment that made me feel great and disgusted at the same time. Anyway, what I could talk for a long time. I did move Bill Knott. I think I moved him 3 times actually. He was in an apartment just off Davis Square. He moved to another one. He somehow got.
That was by Tufts.
Yeah, by Tufts. And then from there, he moved to Pennsylvania with Star Black. And what? Yeah, I think it was Hillsdale, Pennsylvania. This weird little town. And he hired me to move him. And it was Bill and I and a U-Haul truck he rented. And we spent the night in a hotel. Thankfully, we had separate rooms. That would have been really weird. But they were adjoining rooms, and we had to eat breakfast together in this hotel in Pennsylvania. And it was truly the weirdest meal of my life. I can't even explain what was weird about it. It was silent. That was probably the weirdest bit. And then he moved in with Star Black, and 6 months later, they were broken up or something. But I did get out of it what I wanted to get out of it, which was one of his homemade art books that he had painted and decorated. And so, yeah, maybe I used Bill for that book. I don't know. All right, so I'm going to read some Bill poems, and I'm going to read another poem by a poet he introduced me to. And then maybe one of my poems that I wrote for Bill. yesterday. All right. Poem. All right. If I have to be famous, let it be for this great starfish shield I made, and the sands of her face drift over her body. That's the poem that opens up the poem. And poem. A man's mortals break over him and ebb away. Love, youth, Naomi. In femoral jungles, light and shadow play chess. Man is present, judging. Though foundering, I exhale the fate of unknown cities and races, and my glance poison for future gods. The vines are already clinging to man. They know who to back. I live, I burn. My mortals, my guts, break over me and ebb away. Love, youth, Naomi. I'll save this last one for the last, but one of Bill's favorite things to do was to take students to the Brattle bookstore, which is right down the street from Emerson, and he would sort of kind of find you hanging around the 12th floor of the Anson building, and he'd be like, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You got 10 minutes? Come on, let's go. Let's go to I just want to show you this place." So the Brattle has these famous, stickers on them, price tags. And this says September 17th, 2002. I started Emerson the first week of September in 2002. So this must have been like the first couple of weeks of school. He dragged me to Brattle, and this was sitting outside of one of their book bins. Henrik Nordbrandt. This guy knows every poet who's ever lived, but he didn't know Henrik Nordbrandt. Bill found this book in the stack, and he just said, "Here, take this. You should read this." And so here, I'll read this poem from Henrik Nordbrandt, who's a Danish poet. Little Morning Prayer. The saddest thing in the world is a candle burning in the sunshine in early morning. After the night of love, it illuminated so beautifully. Oh God, let our love never become like that. And then I'll read one poem that I wrote yesterday for Bill, and then I'll finish up the reading with a final Bill poem. I don't know if this is like verboten, but I'm doing it anyway.
So
I guess I should just introduce it with one bit of context. So in class one day, in the forms class, so I took the first class with Elisa was just poetry workshop. The next class was a forms class. We spent 5 weeks working on a sonnet. I thought that was crazy, but he was super serious about sonnets. You didn't fuck around with the sonnet with Bill. And this is serious stuff. You had to get it right, and you had to get the meter right. You had to know what was going on historically. You had to have been a reader of sonnets to write a sonnet in his class. And so in one of those classes, he said, I don't know why you're listening to me. I'm not a poet. And that's kind of what I mean when I said it. He killed the poet in me at the same time as he birthed it. But he said, I'm not a poet. And someone was like, what are you? He goes, I'm a poet biscuit. People were like, what? He said, I'm not a poet. I'm a poet biscuit. I'm a poet in the shape. I'm a cookie in the shape of a poet. And so we were just sort of confused by that. And this is a poem called Poet Biscuit for Bill Knott. I'm not a poet, but a poet biscuit, you told our class. Not a poet, but cookie dough shaped and baked into the form of a poet. Joke's on you, though, Bill, because we're not poets either. And this isn't a poem. It's not a poem bagel or even a poem strudel. It's not even edible. It's inorganic, not even a dried out husk of something that used to be alive. It's just a speck, a mote, a passing thought I had while walking the dog this morning in a fog so obliterating that I couldn't see the path in front of me and lost track of time. But I found these lines, though you and I both know these aren't lines, and said them in my head over and over so that later I could sit on the toilet and tap them into my phone's screen. This isn't a poem, or a poem creamsicle, not a poem hamantash, not a poem jute rope, not even a poem paper airplane. It doesn't exist as a material object in this world. The idea of it, coded into some electrons in zeros and ones, uploaded into a cloud to be continuously backed up until one day, when the power goes off and it is nothing, is no more. And this last one, I think, is the last poem in the book, or the third to last poem in the book. And it's that thing where he does the parentheses. Fall and winter, Vietnam, Chicago, 1965. He's got some epigraphs. God created man in his own image, Genesis. Chicago is the architectural showplace of the nation, Chicago newspapers. 1. A shudder falls from the trees at night. The breeze is so light that only the grass on top of graves stirs. Everyone's nose is black with fear. Generals open the burning bodies of children like letters from home with lace on the edges. 2. Oh, it's easy to find Vietnam in Chicago. In these bright streets where our tears lie rotting, we are what's lost. Knock at your shadow to ask the way home from death. 3. Men destroy us in their own image, in their own lost likeness. And this year, even the snowflakes, my last hope, are twisted into awry hurt shapes, designs of screams. Napalm, your own afterbirth on fire descending. 4. Suffering is the same both places, but at least in Vietnam, death is death. Here, in this stainless steel cement tower, white concrete glass city, death is the sole vegetation. Death is life, a green magnet. Thank you.
You got the backside that time. So I was an undergrad student with him, not a grad student. In the undergrad classes, he only offered us $1, not $5 for our poems. He was like, yeah, you guys get you cheap or whatever. But that was the gold standard, right? It was like, if Bill's willing to buy your poem, and sometimes he would offer to buy it because he thought it had potential and you weren't willing to fix it.
Yeah.
You know, he'd be like you'd be you'd be like workshopping it, and then there'd be a student who would be resistant to making the suggested changes, and he'd be like, look, it's almost a good poem. I'll buy it for $1 and then it'll be my poem and I'll make it a good poem, and I remember in a class also him making someone cry. She had written a very personal poem about her grandmother who had passed away, and people were not being mean in the workshop. They were being critical of the poem, and she started being pretty defensive about it. And he kind of said like, well, what's going on? Why aren't, you seem closed off? And she said, well, this poem is about my grandmother and it means a lot to me. And he said, well, big whoop, I was orphaned at 13. That doesn't mean I'm going to write a good poem about it. And then she burst into tears and left the class. She came back. She left that one particular class. But And it's true. He was his mother died in childbirth when Bill was a child, and then he came from a blue collar family. His father was a butcher in rural Michigan. And after his mother died, his father felt like it was too much to raise Bill and his sister on his own, and he put them into an orphanage when Bill was 13 years old. And then Bill was in the orphanage for a number of years, and then they put him in a mental institution. And then at some point, his uncle decided to take him out of the mental institution and bring him in, and his uncle brought him into his house. And it was in rural Michigan high school at that point that Bill first read the poems of John Logan, I think it was. And then Bill went off into the army. He joined the army, and then when he left the army, he moved to Chicago in the 60s. And John Logan was teaching like an adult ed class in poetry in Chicago, and that had been like Bill's intro to poetry. And so he just registered for John Logan's adult ed poetry class and started taking poetry classes with John Logan, who introduced him to John Logan was sort of in Robert Bly's circle. So through that, Bill read a lot of like the surrealists and South American poets that Bly was really championing in the 50s and 60s and 70s that a lot of American audiences hadn't been reading at that time. And that in turn really influenced Bill, and he got turned on to the French surrealists. And in that arc, we have the seed for Corpse and Beans. Bill was actually working as I think it was an orderly in a hospital when he wrote this book, the Naomi Poems. And the title of the book, Naomi Poems, Corpse and Beans, comes from a Robert Desnos book, Corps Bien, which means goods and cargo, like ships and cargo. It's an old shipping term of like when there would be a shipwreck and they get the Corps Bien from the ship. So he did this like homophonic wordplay on Corps Bien and made it Corpse and Beans. And it was that playfulness that you see in this first book throughout all of his other books and throughout his whole career. It's really, really fascinating. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but I want to stop talking now and welcome up our penultimate reader for the evening, Chris Tonelli.
Can do it.
Oh, you know what? Yeah,
I feel like we should be getting better at it.
we should, but we're getting worse. The drugs kicking.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Get the sound bar. Okay, all right, we're good.
Thanks. This is a really special event. This is a really special book. I want to thank Janaka for thinking about it for decades-ish and making it happen in a really fantastic way. The foreword by Richard Hell is fantastic and thoughtful, and I learned stuff that I didn't know, which was really great. I had like the best flight. like I don't know what the two people next to me were doing on their flight, but I read through this cover to cover, and I probably had a better flight than they did. I'm glad that John Scoyles is looking over us. I'm glad that Elisa Gabbert was evoked. One Halloween was her partner at the Providence reading. Besides being a great writer himself, John. My favorite work of art he's done is his Halloween costume. He went as Bill Knott for Halloween one year, and it was excellent. He had some disgusting water, which I guess is tea. I don't know. We didn't know what it was during class, and then an inside-out sweater that was gross. But it was a really good Halloween costume. This is a very special place. Just looking at all the poets that we're surrounded by. Does anyone know Louisa, a former proprietor? She was a Bill Knott-esque figure, and I think they may have made out. That's the rumor.
Really?
I think that's the rumor. I'm just gonna say it right now. Bill Knott and Louisa made out. Don't picture it. Don't picture it if you've eaten already. Don't picture it if you want to eat in the next couple of days. Huh? I'm pretty sure it happened. Anywho, so they one of the characteristics that they shared was paranoia. I think we can all. So I'm coming up from North Carolina to grad school. There's this amazing poetry shop in Harvard Square. That's famous, you know, Harvard Square. And so I'm just like looking at books, and Louisa's like, put that book back. And I was like, I didn't take a book. I was just like, you know, looking. So she swore I was shoplifting. And then the weird part is that the other rumor was that Bill Knott was sliding his own books periodically into the collection, his homemade books. So I was getting accused of stealing while Bill Knott was secretly filling the shelves with his books. So anyway, this is a very special place. This room is filled with very special people, folks that know and love Bill Knott's work, folks that I know and love and have made music with, and who have done wonderful things for the community. Many Johns are in the room who have written some of my favorite books. So this is fantastic. Yeah. Oh, I should get out my phone because that's where I have all the poems I'm going to read. So the book I was looking for here was The Unsubscriber. So I bought it. I was very excited. I love that book. I don't know who reviewed it poorly. It wasn't me. So I put it into his mailbox at school with a note that said, "Congrats on the new book. Could you please sign it for me? I'm really excited for all this." So time goes by. Back in my mailbox in Emerson College was a $20 bill with a note on the other side of the sticker that said, "Don't waste your money." And he took the book. So I had to fucking go buy that book again with his $20. So it's very self-deprecating. It's funny how commerce worked. Like he would buy your poems, but then he would also buy back his own poems. Maybe he just thought it was really good, and he wanted to surround himself with it. I don't know. Anyway. Here's an untitled poem. I only keep this voice to give to anything afraid of me. This is another untitled poem on the next page. To read the future, gaze into your crystal asshole. This is how old I am. Goodbye. If you are still alive when you read this, close your eyes. I am under their lids, growing black. That's at least 6 lines of poetry, so it's time for another anecdote. So Chad brought up John Scoyles' office and thesis time when it's time to defend your thesis. So I was very excited, you know, I was very proud of my little project. And so I walk in, Bill was not late. Bill was waiting for me, probably messy, but not eating. And he said, like he was hosting a game show, he said, "Welcome to Rubber Stamp Hour. We've literally never not approved of a thesis." Meaning this was a meaningless exercise. I was like, "Oh, good. Well, thought I worked hard at it." But I think that's very important. Like subverting expectations. That's a nice way to put it. Subverting hope. That's probably a more practical and useful way to put it. And I don't know. The Bill's is the voice in my head when I write more than anybody else's. And I think he was confused when he made people cry because he was so tender. People have mentioned the sort of surprising tenderness, and he couldn't believe that you'd be upset by his tenderness. Like, I'm telling you this to protect you. I'm telling you this to help you. Why would you ever think it was mean? I mean, the packaging was pretty hard to take sometimes, but I think the folks that love him either got over that or learned how to interpret that or saw that. Like, he doesn't really know how to do tender, but he's doing it, and he did it really well. You just had to sort of, like, I don't know, yeah, speak that language, I guess. Two American poets, T-O, like 4. 2 American poets. 1, there's no time left to write poems. If you will write rallying cries, yes, do so. Otherwise, write poems, then throw yourselves on the river to drift away. Lipo's peach blossom, even if departs this world, can't help us. Pound's or Williams's theories on prosody don't meet the cries of dying children, whose death, I think, is no caesura. Soon there will be no ideas but in things, in rubble, in skulls held under the ocean's magnifying glass, in screams driven into one lightning void. Only you can resurrect the present. People need your voice to come among them like nakedness, to fuse them into one marching language in which the word peace will be said for the last time. Write slogans, write bread that pounds the table for silence, write what I can't imagine, words to wake me and all those who slump over like sapped tombstones when the generals talk. The world is not divided into your schools of poetry. No, there are the destroyers, the Johnsons, the Keys, the Rusks, the Hitlers, the Francos. Then there are those they want to destroy, lovers, teachers, plows, potatoes. This is the division. You are not important. Your black mountains, solitary farms, LSD trains. Don't forget, you are important. If you fail, there will be no one left to say so. If you succeed, there will also be a great silence. Your names, an open secret in all hearts, no one will say. But everywhere they will be finishing the poems you broke away from. 2. What I mean is, maybe you are the Earth's last poets. Lipo's riverbank poems are far, far out in eternity, but a nuclear war could blow us that far in an instant. There's no time left. Tolstoy's I would plow, 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 but with no one left to seed, reap, you write? Oh, rocks are short-lived as man now. But still, this Billy Budd world blesses its murderers with spring, even as I write this. So I have nowhere else to turn to but you. Old echoes are useless. Glare from the fireball this planet will become already makes shadows of us. There's Einstein, the light of poems streaking through space, growing younger, younger, becoming the poet again somewhere? No. What I mean is, let's see. Oh yeah, so the moving story. So we packed him up, and he had won the Guggenheim. He doesn't like winning things. He doesn't like not winning things. Anyway, he won this one. He's very skeptical of things he won, but he was also very skeptical of things he did not win. Like, why did they win? Anyway, so he won the Guggenheim. But with the Guggenheim, he bought a home in the Poconos for he and Star Black, which is like maybe his first real adult relationship. I don't know, hard to say, except for with Louisa. Let's keep that going. But they broke up, and then the market turned, and so his house was underwater. So he actually lost money by winning the Guggenheim. It's a very Bill situation. So I got a Ryder truck, big Ryder truck, and picked him up, and we went to the Poconos to get all his shit from that house. So I was undoing the Chad move to get him then to Michigan. luckily the Poconos I didn't have to eat or anything with. But on the way there, the tenderness and I don't know. So the thing I remember most was he did a lot of like word searches and crossword puzzles, and read a lot of Agatha Christie, and not like Paul Celan or something, like just reading Agatha Christie and eating tons of I guess they're hostess snowballs, the pink things, yeah. And I was just like, what the fuck is happening right now? This is like literally the best three things: Bill Knott, snowballs, and Agatha Christie. Oh yeah, four things, and word searches or whatever. Just very human and vulnerable, and not like pretentious in any way. It was a lesson without being a lesson. It was like, oh, so I can just read kind of this stuff, whatever I enjoy. I can eat some things I enjoy and not be like fancy. And I don't know. It made an impression. Poem. The only response to a child's grave is to lie down before it and play dead. Sean, did you have Bicos up here?
Yeah, dude. Sure.
No.
Yeah.
I wrote one poem for Bill Knott, and it's called Bicos because of that book. Bicos for Bill Knott. This was written for Rubber Stamp Hour. So a little peek into that. Bicos for Bill Knott. The first word could not possibly have been Bicos. Or maybe it was Bicos, the Phrygian word for bread. But the I was definitely implied, as in, do you have any Bicos for me? Or look, I created Bicos. Or even, look, you created Bicos. I wish it had been me. Janaka talked about his, and folks have talked about his punk rockness and his eschewing of traditional publishing, which I think the problem with it wasn't generous. Like, I think one of his values was generosity, giving things to people when he wanted to. I want to have as much as I can to give to my students. His office was a mess, of course, and he could hardly carry all the shit he wanted to carry. It was always awkward if you got on the elevator with him. But it was so he could bring you stuff. Like, you need to have this book because that one line of that pretty shitty poem reminded me of this, and you should read it so all your lines can remind me of this or whatever, you know. It was all in a spirit of generosity. So he started making these books from, I guess it's from Lulu, and then sometimes he would even put art on the back. And so I don't. This book's totally fine. We have a lot of them. There's a lot of them. He wrote a lot, but the reason why I picked it was because I have that painting in my house, so it's very special to me. Yeah. I think the thing I learned most about Bill was to sort of that sort of eschewing, and I think Janaka talked about it with his publishing endeavor, Black Ocean, which is very inspirational for a lot of our publishing endeavors, making beautiful books with poetry in it that's beautiful, that weren't getting published either beautifully, or the work itself wasn't very good. And so Black Ocean was a model, and Bill was a model for that. He never recommended a poet you'd heard of at the time. You know, it's like, what? Okay. Or like this guy.
Henrik Norberg.
Yeah, who's that? I don't know. But that poem was amazing, right? But it's just your other teachers weren't telling you this. And so like the sort of poetry industrial complex was a thing that he pointed out in his own special way. Mostly like a little bit jealousy, a little bit paranoid, but mostly rebelling. And that stuck with me as a thing that was antithetical to poetry. And so thank you to Janaka for taking that spirit and making Black Ocean and making this book. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. I'll share probably share a couple more small anecdotes as I wrap up our reading for tonight. One of the things I remember from when we packed him up in Cambridge was, which I'll come to in a minute. So we'll backtrack a number of years when I was in his class, and Sonic Youth was playing at Royale, or one of the big music venues downtown in Boston. And when Sonic Youth got up on stage before they started their set, Thurston Moore says, "It's great to be playing here in Boston. We're down the street from Emerson College, where the greatest living American poet, Bill Knott, teaches." And then they played their set. And I was at the show with a couple of my friends who were also students of Bill's, and we were like, whoa, holy shit. We go into class the next day and we're like, Bill, guess what? We were at the Sonic Youth show last night and Thurston said this. And he's like, only obscure rock musicians like my work. He's like really like dismissive and almost irritated about the whole situation. And then when we packed him up to move, I remember, among other things in his apartment, he had this whole like box of Sonic Youth like records and merch and stuff like that. And he offered it to the three of us. And he's like, Thurston keeps sending me this stuff. If you want any of it, you can. Anyway.
Did you take it?
I took a couple things. Did either of you guys?
Stuff like that Sonic Youth merch.
Yeah. Okay. I remember that in the. Yeah. Anyway, I took a couple of things. Yeah. But he was like that. I mean, you're hearing he had this like complicated relationship with acknowledgement. Timothy Liu actually last night we did an online event through City Lights, and Timothy Liu told a story that I hadn't heard before, and I don't remember which collection it was, but Bill Knott had a book that was chosen by Charles Simic for publication for an award, and Charles Simic had to pull his blurb for the book after he had selected it, because when he read the manuscript, he marked all his favorite lines throughout the manuscript. And then Bill cut every one of those lines from the manuscript before it was published.
Oh.
And then Simic was like, I don't know what to say about this book now. Like, it wasn't like he reworked the whole thing. He literally just cut every one of Simic's favorite lines from the.
Because he had read the blurb and they were Simic's favorite lines.
No, it was like Simic had, as he was the judge of the contest, and whatever, he was whatever, just like, I love this line, I love this line, I love this line. And then, Bill got the manuscript back and was like, redact. So I've been thinking, like, I'm going to reach out to Robert Fanning, who's the executor of Bill's estate, and it's like, I would love to, if I could get my hands on that hard copy and publish a chapbook that's just the redacted lines. Like, how cool would that be? But anyway. Poem. The beach holds and sifts us through her dreaming fingers. Summer fragrances gleam between your legs. At night, naked auras cool the waves. Vanished. Oh, Naomi. I kiss every body of you. every face. Prose poem. Each evening the sea casts starfish up on the beach, scattering, stranding them. They die at dawn, leaving black hungers in the sun. We slept there that summer. We fucked in their radiant evolutions up to our body, ringed by starfish, gasping for their element. We joined to create ours. All night, they inhaled the sweat from our thrusting limbs and lived. Often she cried out, "Your hand!" It was a starfish, caressing her with my low fire. The Naomi in the Naomi poems is pretty well known at this point to be Naomi Lazard. And what is striking about that, falling back to one of Chris's comments, is that in an interview with Naomi Lazard, she was asked about, because he also has another book that came out after this called Knights of Naomi. And she said, yeah, we never even kissed. And
Did she say he smelled bad?
she did also say he smelled a little funny in that interview, which seemed unnecessary.
Pretty redundant.
Yeah. But it's amazing to me that that this human who had such tenderness, such depth of eroticism in his poems. For all we know, really only kissed two women, Louisa and Star Black. Let the record show. And not only in talking about romantic relationships, but in those interpersonal relationships with his students, with others. There's this great story so he also did his MFA at Vermont College, which he did, by the way, in like his 50s or 60s. Like he was already a professor at Emerson, and they basically said you need a master's in order for us to make you a full-time professor. So he's like, okay, I'll go do this low res program. I've already published 11 books, but okay. And so then he goes and studies with these teachers who like studied Bill when they were students. But at Vermont College, they have this graduation ceremony. When you give your graduation reading, at the end of your reading, everyone lines up in a big hug line to hug you.
Yeah.
At the end of your reading. And he gave right, everyone's like, I see where this is going. In the reading he gave his room in, which I ended up giving my reading in that room years later, has these huge floor to ceiling windows. It's on the ground floor. And obviously I wasn't there for his reading, but some of my professors had been his professors, and they told me that at the end of his reading, he finishes his last poem and he just throws his manuscript down and turns and runs across the room as people are lining up to hug him, and jumps out the window and ran down the street. And then no one saw him for 2 days until the graduation ceremony. And sort of jogging, probably. But that's the same guy who wrote these love poems. It's really phenomenal. After the burial. After the burial, I alone stood by till 2 workmen came to shovel the dirt back into the hole. There was some left over, the dirt she'd displaced, and they wheeled it off. Drawn, not knowing why, I followed at a distance. Coming to a small back lot, they dumped it, then left. I walked over. It made a small mound, and all around her, similar mounds, pure cones of joy. First gifts from the dead. I fell to my knees before it and fell forward on my hands into it, to the elbows, like wash water. For the first time, I became empty enough to cry for her. When I was working on this book, and Richard was a real partner in the production of this book. He didn't just write the foreword, but he helped me exhaustively proofread it and copy read it over and over. And Bill was constantly revising and changing his poems over the years, and all these self-published remixes that he made of like love poems, short poems, sonnets, all this stuff. These were poems that had appeared over and over in print for decades. And each time there would often be a little change. There'd be like a word changed here or a break changed there or a punctuation mark moved. And by example, when The Unsubscriber came out, he mailed me an advanced reader copy of it. And you know, this was like, it hadn't even hit the stands yet. This was like hot off the presses. And I get the copy of The Unsubscriber and I start eagerly reading it. And almost on every page, he's made pencil marks of changes to the poems that, you know, he's like, change this word here. And, you know, and this was not like his photo, like this was, he had just done this for this one copy that I was reading. And so when it came time to publish this book, I had a little bit of a conundrum of, well, which version of these poems do I publish? Because they first appeared in 1968, but almost all of these poems have appeared in different selected and remixed versions that he's made over the years. And I decided that I wanted to really make this an homage and a historical artifact to that original book that so many of us encountered and was such a cultural influence. So these poems, as they appear in this book, are true to the original 1968 publication. And I even worked to make the fonts match, to make all the spacing match as much as possible for every single line. If you're familiar with the original cover, it's a woman facing forward with long black flowing hair. And so we reversed it for the reprint. And then we did this is the original first title page from the book, The Naomi Poems, Book 1, Corpse and Beans, St. Gerard, 1940 to 1966. And so in that process, Richard and I mean, we read like every single word of this book to make sure it lined up. And yet,
Oh no.
as soon as I got the book in hand and I'm reading through, I read that last poem, which was one of my favorites, After the Burial, and there's a fucking typo in it. And so what I wanted to offer for anyone who either has a copy already or is going to buy a copy tonight is that I have a pencil with me, and in the spirit of Bill Knott, I will make that little correction mark in your book for you before you leave this evening. Death. Going to sleep. I cross my hands on my chest. They will place my hands like this. It will look as though I am flying into myself. Thank you all for coming. I really want to thank my fellow readers, some of whom traveled from quite far away to read here tonight and celebrate Bill's work. I want to thank James and the Grolier for hosting us and all of you for coming out and joining us. I used to run a reading series at Brookline Booksmith, and at the Brookline Booksmith, they had these, I don't know if they still have them, they had these posters up that say, when you buy a book from an indie bookstore, you just did 10 great things, and it sort of enumerates the great things. And so I would elaborate on that. You know, if you buy an independently published book from an indie bookstore, I guess you've probably done like 20 great things, right? And a lot of us do a lot of bad things, or like questionable things, or just like not our proudest moments or whatever throughout the week. And if you do like, if you buy any one of these books here tonight from Grolier, you've done 10 great things. And that probably absolves you from like a week of bad behavior. If you buy an independently published book from an independent bookstore, you've done 20 great things, and that probably lets you off the hook for most of December. But if you were to buy like a few books tonight, and I see a lot of great books around here, you've done probably like 30, 40, 50 great things. And man, that's going to take you like clear into next year.
Yeah.
So I encourage you all to support Grolier, to support the wonderful presses that have books here. And thank you all again for coming out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending this evening. Let's give all the readers another round of applause for a wonderful evening. Like I said, we have some books for sale. Thank you so much for coming. If everyone could please put your chairs just up against one of the walls, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Can we get all the readers in this corner while I have you so you can take a photo now? Let's do it.
Is it the bookmark one? I wanted to read it.
Yeah.